Hello, and welcome to the second installation of the NextGen series, presented by the National Veterans Network in collaboration with the National Museum of the United States Army. For this episode, Chief of Exhibits Paul Morando will be speaking with two descendants of Japanese-American World War II veterans. He will be showing a unique travel bag that Sergeant Gary Uchida of the 100th Infantry Battalion carried throughout his service during World War II. Joining Paul will be 10-year-old Mia, a student from Bend, Oregon, and 11-year-old Alethea, a student from Honolulu, Hawaii, who has a special connection to Gary Uchida. Let's take a look at their journey to learn about this amazing bag.
Okay, well, hello everybody. I am so happy to be talking with both of you today about history, right? About Gary Uchida and his travel bag. As the chief curator of the National Army Museum, my job is to interpret objects, right, and develop exhibits on these objects or on these different stories. And one of the objects on display in our Nisei Soldiers Gallery, which is a special exhibit on Nisei soldiers, is this travel bag. And so I just want to briefly talk a little bit about Sergeant Gary Uchida, because I know you have questions of me, and we can talk in more detail about him and the bag that he had when he traveled in the Army. So as I mentioned before, this travel bag belonged to Sergeant Gary Uchida, who served in the Army from 1941 to 1945 with the 100th Infantry Battalion. He was born in Hawaii and joined the Army at Schofield Barracks in 1941, just 6 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And I do know that both your great grandfathers served, and Alethea, your great grandfather is Gary Uchida. So I want to start with you first and see what questions you have of me about him. Hello.
Hello. I really wasn't taught much about my great-grandfather by my family, so I guess that's why I wanted to learn more. Yeah, I never really got a chance to meet him either, so.
That's okay. That's fine. I'm here to kind of give you some information about him. And the bag that you see in front of you is actually on display here in the National Army Museum. So, visitors of all ages can come see this bag and learn about your great-grandfather. So this bag was kind of like his personal diary. And so what happened to Sergeant Uchida during the war, he got injured. He was wounded by artillery shell, basically this big gun, and shrapnel hit him. And he was injured in 3 places. He was injured in his arm, in his knees, and also in his head. So he spent a lot of time in different hospitals. And so can you tell me a little bit about what you see on the bag? Or can you read something that you see on the bag that you like more information about?
Numbers underneath his name, and lots of references, or not really references, but I see some things I recognize, like the Aloha Tower.
Yeah. So these are things that he's seen. The number under is probably his, what I can tell, is maybe a military ID number, that, kind of like an identification number on the bag in case it gets lost. But obviously he was a pretty good artist, right? In drawing things. If you can look at the bag, is there anything on there that you see that you would like to read to us?
Besides just like the well-known landmarks like Aloha Tower, Waikiki Beach, and Diamond Head, I don't know much Hawaiian from other what we're taught in school, but it says Va Mauke Ea Oka Aina Ika Pono.
So is there can you tell me, it looks like a picture of a fish underneath his name, and there's writing underneath that. Do you know what type of fish that is?
Humu Humu Nuku Nuku Wapua'a.
Wow.
Triggerfish. Humu Humu, we call them.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's something I just learned that you told me by reading the information or the drawing or the on this bag, and I think that's awesome. So I've learned something from you today, and obviously that was something that was important to Gary Uchida, as a native or was native fish of Hawaii. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We can now move on to Mia and her set of questions at this time.
Why did he go to so many hospitals? He wrote a lot of them on his bag.
Yeah, he did go to a lot of hospitals, not only overseas when he was in the Army, also when he got home. I read that he went to a hospital in Seattle, Washington. He was in a hospital in Iowa, and also a hospital in Hawaii. And so he was wounded on the battlefield. Artillery shell and shrapnel, which are these pieces of metal that explode on impact, and be very dangerous. And he was hit very hard in 3 locations: in his arm, his kneecap, and on his head. In fact, I read a story about his helmet had a hole through it where the shrapnel hit, and he said that his helmet saved his life. So remarkable, right? So when he was wounded, he had to go to different hospitals when he was being discharged from the Army. So a lot of those places you see, or he writes on his bag, or he draws certain things, it's when he stayed at those hospitals in those areas. So great question.
And then at the very top above the words North Africa, there's a person. Who is that?
Yeah, if we can see the bag, I'm not sure if we have an image of that person. Since he was in North Africa, I found out he stayed in a hospital in Algiers, which is located in North Africa. And if you look closely at the person, it could be, a citizen or a man from Algiers. Perhaps he traveled to Egypt. If you look below North Africa, what do you see there? What do you see below? It looks like an animal.
A camel?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So I'm sure he saw camels, and maybe he was in Egypt, but more than likely, he just drew a person he saw from Algiers when he was in that hospital.
Why did he write, "Oui, mademoiselle, comment allez-vous"?
Wow, you speak great French.
Thanks.
Do you know what that means?
I think it means like, yes, ma'am. How are you?
Absolutely right. That's exactly what it means. So more than likely, maybe he spoke to somebody, or a store owner, buying coffee or something like that, or just conversation that he overheard during his travel, and that probably stuck with him. So when he heard it, he wrote it down. Now, I mentioned to Alethea about this bag being a diary. So do you have a diary that you write things in?
Yes.
Yeah, and sometimes maybe you do some drawings as well?
Yeah, I do it online, but I do it on an app that you can draw and type.
Oh, really?
So yeah.
So isn't that kind of cool that he used this bag like you use your app, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think this bag meant to him then?
Well, I think it had a lot of sentimental value because it kept track of all the places that he visited and yeah.
Right. And so someday someone will find your app, right, or your digital diary, and maybe keep learn a little bit more about you, right? Maybe you write about where you traveled, or friends that you had in school, or what have you. So isn't it amazing now that this bag is going to be on display in the museum, and thousands of visitors are going to walk by this bag and look at this bag and read about Sergeant Uchida, and they'll learn so much about him by just looking at this bag, right? I mean, isn't that neat?
Yeah.
So they'll know where he went. They know what he's seen. They'll know what he experienced in the Army, and that's what makes objects like this so special. Um, and that's why it's in the National Museum of the United States Army. Right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking time to talk with me about this, and I enjoyed it. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hello, thank you again so much for this amazing experience. I learned so much and I learned how much I didn't know, and now I want to learn a lot more. But yes, I learned so many great things. And this travel bag that we focused on, I've seen it before, but I never really thought about what it meant because it meant so much, and about my great grandfather. And through this, I learned more about him. And through that, I learned more about other people who experienced many of the same things at that time. This was a really enjoyable and fun experience. I had an amazing time meeting Paul and Alethea and everyone else involved. And I learned a lot about his bag. And it's really cool how he kind of used it as a diary to record all the places he went. And this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I really had a good time.